Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel where we talk about Hungarian true crimes, murders, mysteries and maybe eventually some conspiracies. And today's video, I think it's going to be a little bit shorter than usual, as much as I can foresee, and that's because there is almost no information on this case. I have only found two sources that are pretty much the same, so I don't even know how much of this is true, but it was such an insane and brutal murder that I just wanted to make a video about this. Before we start though, I wanted to mention two YouTube channels. One is Zoe Spinett, who literally exploded overnight. One day her video had like 700 views, which I was like, what? Did I miss something? Congratulations! That's so inspirational. And the other channel who I started following a few weeks ago is The Investigator, who is another European channel covering a lot of international cases. And when I started following this channel, it was like 400 subs, and now she has like almost 2,000. Like, what? How do you guys do this? I don't understand. Either way, congratulations to you both. And let's just get started with this video. Today's case is going to involve a lot of graphic descriptions of a very brutal murder, so if you are not ready to hear such details, then I would advise you skip this video entirely. The story starts out with a man called R. Imre. That means that his family name has the initial R and his given name is Imre. And this is a form of anonymity in Hungary. People who are either involved in or are affected by a crime, we don't know their full family names, obviously. And this man was a poultry commissioner. Now, I don't even really know how to explain this. I am not sure if you had this job in other countries. It is certainly not a thing anymore in modern times. But a poultry commissioner is technically somebody who lends money and sometimes equipment to people who want to start their poultry selling business, kind of like an investor of some sort. And Imre had a 20-year-old employee called Guba Sándor. So Guba was his family name and Sándor is his given name, but I'm going to refer to everybody with their given names today, just to keep it all uniform. And Sándor's job was to be a debt collector. He was the one to go around town by bike with his two briefcases to collect the cash and fill out the paperwork from the debtors of Imre's commission company. One day on a Saturday, on the 14th of August 1948, Imre reported his employee Sándor missing to the police and that he had gone missing with all of the cash of that day, which was about 12,000 forints, so that was a lot of money. Imre trusted Sándor 100%, and he said that Sándor would never abuse his power as debt collector and he would just not go missing with the money on his own accord. Even though the police was very chaotic and disorganized at that time in 1948, a very historical year, as soon as Sándor was reported missing, they took it seriously and put a lot of effort into this investigation because they could just sense that something was wrong and he didn't just run away with the money. Everybody who knew Sándor was questioned and looked into, but to no avail. The police couldn't produce a single suspect regarding his disappearance. It wasn't until a few weeks later, on the 9th of September, that somebody came across on the outskirts of Budapest, on a then cornfield, what looked like meat wrapped into pieces of newspaper and rags, semi-covered with soil on the ground. And it was obviously not animal meat, because at that time, in those circumstances, nobody would just toss out food like that, especially not in such suspicious circumstances, right? So the police was notified and they immediately looked into it as the possibility of a murder investigation. They took the remains to, I guess, not an autopsy because it was all in pieces, but to a forensic expert. And this expert was able to identify that it was indeed pieces of human flesh in the advanced stages of decomposition. They even found a whole foot between the remains. And it looked like some of the pieces of flesh were fully deboned, like a good butcher work. And the rags that some of the remains were wrapped into turned out to be clothes and handkerchiefs. So there was no doubt that this was somebody who was murdered brutally and then discarded so inhumanely on a cornfield. And this was obviously sensational news, and it was huge in the media. And this is how Imre heard about it too. He knew that his employee, Sándor, went missing just a few weeks earlier in the same general area, so he was afraid that it might have been him. So Imre notified the police to let them know about this. Therefore, the police called in the family members of Sándor to try to identify his remains from the clothes that were found with the body. And unfortunately for the family, they were able to confirm that it was their missing family member. Now the police had the body and the identity of the victim, so all they had to do now was to find the murderer and the motive, and that wasn't going to take a long time at all. As I said, next to the body they found 2 handkerchiefs, and these handkerchiefs had embroidered initials on them. One of them had the initials SE and the other had the initials ZL. And somehow this was a clear and obvious indication to the police that it could have been no other than a man called Szebeny Lajos. Szebeny Lajos was a 44-year-old goose dealer who actually was a debtor of Imre. How the police was able to connect him to these 2 handkerchiefs was a bit confusing to me, so let me explain to you and you tell me how you think the police could connect him. They said that these handkerchiefs with the initials were a clear indication that it was the property of Szebeny Lajos because Lajos was an uneducated man. I do not understand what the initials stood for because SE and ZL are not the initials of Szebeny Lajos. And even if they were somehow, then the letters were in the wrong order. And I don't understand why Lajos, being uneducated, had to do anything with these handkerchiefs. Because if he did not even know how to spell his own name correctly, and therefore somehow mistook the order of the letters to be embroidered on the handkerchiefs, him being a man in the last century would not have been the one to embroider the handkerchiefs anyway. It would have been a woman, so they had plenty of time and opportunity to notice that it was the wrong initials. But you see, I just don't understand how the police could connect him to this based on the handkerchiefs. And somehow the police was right because he confessed to be the murderer and gave the police an insanely detailed description of the crime. That same year, in the spring of 1948, Lajos and his wife decided to open up their own poultry dealing business, and therefore they needed some cash, so they took out a nice little loan from Imre's commission company. However, after several months, their business was not going very well, and they were not able to pay the debt in the installments as they were supposed to. Lajos tried to borrow money from other people to be able to pay off the installments, and therefore he was in this spiral of debt. At some point, Lajos even sold his wife's accordion, which was a very expensive and rare and special thing at the time. So obviously his wife got super mad and made him promise to get it back. So Lajos in the end lost that money as well. And then he had to come up with another plan on how to pay back his debts to Imre. And he figured, what else would be easier and better than stealing money from Imre to then pay his own money back to him? And the easiest and quickest way to Imre's money was through Sándor, because he was walking around all the time with bags full of cash. And Sándor went into Lajos's business quite often. I am not sure if Sándor collected debts every day, every week, or every month, but regardless, he was a frequent visitor in Lajos's business. And Lajos sent his wife back home to the countryside to be away when he would commit the crime. And he actually had the chance to kill Sándor several times that week, but he was always interrupted by his stupid customers. Like, how dare customers go into his failing business and spend money when he is trying to kill somebody? It took him until the end of that week, on Saturday, to finally get around killing Sándor. Sándor went into Lajos's business that day a little bit earlier, and Lajos sent him away and told him to come back soon when he would have the cash ready. And while Sándor was away, Lajos prepared the murder scene. He closed the blinds on the windows, he closed the business, and he prepared a 700-gram butcher knife in his hand's reach. So when Sándor came back that same day to collect the debt, Lajos coaxed him behind the counter, where the unsuspecting and innocent Sándor started filling out the paperwork, crouching over the desk or the counter with his back to Lajos. And that was when Lajos took his chance and slammed this big-ass butcher knife into the back of Sándor's head, who looked up at him and asked, "Why are you hurting me?" When I read this question in the source, I could just cry, because these few words contain so much surprise, confusion, and boyish innocence. I don't know, I just feel so bad for this poor young man. Lajos went on with his plan, and he continued beating, hitting, and slamming the knife into Sándor's face and body until he eventually just cut off his nose entirely. That was when Sándor fell onto the ground unconscious. Lajos dragged his body into the back of the shop, and while Sándor was still alive but unconscious, Lajos decapitated him. Lajos then started butchering Sándor's body just like it was a piece of chicken. Some pieces were nugget size, some pieces were bigger, and the limbs were entirely deboned. He then wrapped the pieces into the newspapers and his own clothes as well as the handkerchiefs, and then put all of the body into a goose basket. He also got rid of Sándor's bicycle by leaving it in a random street a little bit further away. Then the next day, he took the pieces of Sándor's body from the goose basket and stuffed them inside Sándor's own 2 briefcases, and then took it out onto the cornfield where it would later be found. It took him 5 turns to transport all of the pieces of Sándor's body. Then that same day, Lajos went to Imre, the owner of the commission company, the boss of Sándor, to pay his debts to him personally. And he said that the previous day Sándor failed to show up to collect his debts, but he was such an honest and diligent person, he knew that paying his debt was his duty. Then Lajos went on to pay some of the money that he owed to other people as well, but he was careful to only pay in small installments, not to raise suspicion that he had a lot of cash all of a sudden. After this detailed confession, the police obviously had no doubt that this was a true story, and Lajos himself was the murderer. Only 4 days after Lajos was detained, his trial started on the 13th of September. And what we call the impromptu court sentenced him to death only 3 days after the beginning of the trial, on the 16th of September. Now, I do not know how he was executed. I assume most likely hanging, that was the fashion at the time, and I also can't tell exactly when, but I assume that it would have been very soon after the trial ended, because it was a very fast-moving court case. That is all I can tell you about this case, because I just don't know anything else about the aftermath. I do not know what happened to the family of Sándor or Lajos or the business of Imre. There is nothing else at all. Let me know what you think of this case. Do you know some murder cases that are similarly gruesome or brutal? If you have made it this far, you might as well like this video, leave your opinion in the comment section down below, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to really help me out, share my channel with one person you think would like my content. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you next time. Bye!